Tonight, we journey somewhere ancient. You stand at the edge of the Nile under a molten orange sky, the last light bouncing off the slow, sacred river. The air hums with the buzz of insects and the distant bleating of goats, and the ground beneath your sandals is cracked like an old clay pot. There's a tang in the wind, dry heat, smoke, maybe something faintly rotten. You squint into the haze, and all you see is sun-scorched earth stretching forever. Welcome to ancient Egypt, land of gods, gold, and more sand than you ever want in your mouth. And heads up, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Blackmail, where are you listening from? Drop your city and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take your first step across the Nile floodplain and instantly regret it. The sand clutches your feet like it's got unfinished business with you. It's everywhere, in your shoes, your nose, your ears, possibly your soul. The sun above isn't just hot, it's a celestial bully. You thought summer in your hometown was brutal? That was cute. Here, even the shade feels like a sauna someone set to hellfire. Your eyelids sting from the light bouncing off the ground, and you start to realize how clever those wide-brimmed reed hats are. But you don't have one, of course. You're rocking the exposed foreigner look. Pink cheeks, squinting eyes, and a growing suspicion that your deodorant gave up back at the ferry. The ground isn't soft beach sand. It's gritty, packed, and sprinkled with tiny shells from when this land was underwater millennia ago. You wonder briefly if the ancients used exfoliating foot scrubs. Then remember, they had sandals woven from palm fronds, and they still walked everywhere like it was nothing. You've already earned 2 blisters and a personal vendetta against the concept of dirt roads. And it's not just walking that's hard. Breathing here is its own full-time job. The dry air scratches at your throat, and your lips start cracking like old papyrus scrolls. You instinctively reach for a water bottle, but this is 1500 BCE. Your options are well water, which tastes like metal and moss, or Nile water, which looks inviting, until you remember the crocodiles, hippos, and things that wiggle under the skin. Still, it's beautiful in a strange, unforgiving way. You pass rows of date palms swaying lazily in the heat, and mud brick homes huddled together like baked loaves. The distant sound of flutes and drums wafts from the village. Someone's probably celebrating the end of a successful barley harvest. You're too busy looking for shade. Oh, and the insects. Let's talk about the flying teeth. Mosquitoes are ever-present companions, especially after the inundation, when the river floods its banks and turns everything into an accidental spa for bugs. They don't care about your essential oils, or that you once paid $12 for citronella lotion. You are fresh, soft-skinned, and exotic, a 5-star buffet. By now, you've noticed the locals don't just tolerate the heat. They move with it, slow efficient, unhurried. You try to match their pace, but you're already soaked through with sweat. Your arms feel like sunburned noodles, and that linen tunic you thought was authentic is rapidly becoming a prison of scratchy regret.
Here's a fun fact.
Ancient Egyptians invented the calendar in part to track the sun and floods. Their lives revolved around understanding this brutal environment, predicting its moods, pleasing its gods. You? You just want an iced coffee and an Uber back to 2025. Historians still argue whether the climate during the Old Kingdom was harsher than today or merely different. Some say it was wetter, more forgiving. But you're not feeling any of that mercy. All you feel is a thin trickle of sweat tracing down your back like a judgment from Ra himself. And it's only morning. You wake up on a woven mat that's about as comfortable as a pile of papyrus scrolls. And the first thing you feel, besides the dull ache in your hips, is heat. Again. The kind of heat that makes your eyelashes sweat. Before you can even stretch, you hear the scratch of rushes against the doorway and the soft shuffle of bare feet outside. Time to get dressed. Or, more accurately, time to awkwardly wrap yourself in what the locals generously call clothing. Linen. You've read it's breathable, cool, light, perfect for the desert. Lies. The minute you slip into your finely woven white tunic, held together with nothing but a belt and hope, it clings to your body like a desperate X. Every gust of wind, few and far between, lifts it at unfortunate angles, and every bead of sweat turns it semi-transparent. You can now fully empathize with ancient Egyptian fashion problems, how to look respectable while basically wearing a heat-trapping bedsheet.
Still, it's better than wool.
Or leather. The elite, of course, have access to finer threads, dyed fabrics, pleated designs. You, the humble visitor, are rocking the plain commoner's look. Simple tunic, maybe a bead necklace if you're lucky. No shoes, too hot, too expensive. And besides, sandals are saved for special occasions. As you step outside, your tunic immediately picks up dust, clings to your knees, and starts rubbing your inner thighs like sandpaper. Let's not even talk about chafing. You already regret everything. A local walks past. She's effortlessly styled with a linen sheath dress, a thick collar of faience beads, and eye paint that seems immune to sweat. She nods at you. You nod back, too embarrassed to admit that the coal lining your own eyes ran off 5 minutes ago and is now somewhere near your chin. Oh, the eyeliner? It's not just for fashion. That thick black coal? It's made from galena, lead ore. Yes, the ancient world's idea of beauty doubled as a mild form of poisoning. But it also helped reduce glare and repel flies, so win some, lose some. You try to imitate their cool, composed walk, but your tunic's twisted around your knees, and your thighs are performing a tragic duet of friction burns. Also, you forgot deodorant. Not that it exists here, at least not in stick form. The ancient deodorant formula is a delightful paste of ground carob, incense resin, and animal fat. You'd try it, but you don't have access to a priest, a perfumer, or a sacrificial goat. Instead, you try not to raise your arms too high. Here's a quirky tidbit. Egyptian nobles sometimes kept scented wax cones on their heads during parties. They'd slowly melt in the heat, releasing pleasant smells and staining their wigs with perfume. You wonder how you'd pull that off at a modern dinner party. Sorry about the candle on my scalp, just trying to smell nice. Since historians still argue whether ordinary Egyptians wore wigs daily or just for ceremonial events. But what's clear is that body hair wasn't in fashion. Men, women, children, all shaved. Entire families bald as polished statues. You, on the other hand, are dealing with heat, dust, and enough armpit hair to offend the gods. The thought of a bronze razor near your face makes you flinch. You reach for a water jug in the corner of your house, cooled by evaporation through porous clay, and splash your face. It's a moment of bliss. A second later, a fly lands on your nose. Bliss revoked. Even your skin isn't safe. The sun blisters down mercilessly, and you remember reading somewhere about ancient sunscreen. It involved mixing crushed lotus flowers with, you guessed it, crocodile dung. Supposedly protective. Possibly just wishful thinking. Either way, you're not putting it on your face. And as you step back out into the heat, tunic clinging, skin already sizzling, and your dignity melting faster than a wax cone in July, it hits you. They didn't just survive this. They thrived in it. Built pyramids, wrote poetry, held festivals, worshipped cats. You're 2 steps from heat stroke and muttering apologies to your linen tunic like it's a hostile spirit. Your stomach grumbles like an angry scarab beetle. You've barely been in ancient Egypt a few hours, and your modern breakfast cravings are already throwing tantrums. No coffee, no eggs, no croissant in sight. Instead, you're handed a wooden bowl that smells faintly of river mud and a jug of something fermented. Welcome to breakfast in the land of the pharaohs. Hope you like onions. Your host, a cheerful woman with sun-browned skin and gold bangles jingling on her wrists, gestures for you to eat. You look down at your bowl. Inside, a chunk of dense, gritty bread, baked with stone-ground flour that still contains bits of quartz, and a handful of raw sliced onions. You blink. She smiles. You chew. The bread is tough, not chewy, artisan sourdough tough, more like I just bit into gravel tough. Ancient Egyptian bread was baked with flour ground between sandstone slabs, which left tiny shards in the dough. Dentists today have nightmares about it, and pharaohs' mummies often show worn-down molars. You suddenly understand why the afterlife was so appealing. The onions, surprisingly spicy. Sharp, they wake you up better than espresso. Egyptians believed onions had sacred properties, symbolic of eternal life, thanks to their concentric rings, and practical ones, like keeping you regular and warding off evil spirits. Or maybe warding off everyone else, because wow, your breath is now weaponized. Next up, beer. Yes, for breakfast. This isn't your Friday night lager. It's thick, yeasty, and cloudy, more like barley porridge that forgot how to be solid. Egyptians drank beer like water, literally. Fermented from emmer wheat and often flavored with herbs, this brew had low alcohol content but high calories, which made it a staple for laborers and nobles alike. You take a cautious sip. It tastes like sour bread soup. A second sip, slightly better. By the third, you start to understand why they served this stuff at every meal. It's liquid bread. It fills you. It dulls the heat. It hides the fact you're eating rocks. And it might explain why everyone is so chill before noon. Here's a quirky tidbit. Egyptian brewers sometimes sang to their beer to encourage proper fermentation. Whether it helped the yeast or just made them feel better, no one knows. But the brewing goddess Tenenet was often invoked with lullabies. You hum one now, if only to distract yourself from your digestive rebellion. Historians still argue whether meat was a daily luxury or strictly reserved for the rich. Wall paintings suggest lavish feasts, but archaeological remains show that the average citizen's diet leaned heavily on vegetables, legumes, and bread. Occasionally, a fish. Once in a blue moon, duck or goose if you lived near a temple. You're working through the realization that even cheese isn't guaranteed here. A young boy runs by holding a fig, juice dripping down his chin. You remember those are in season. You snag one from a low-hanging branch and bite in. Sweet relief. For a moment, the world softens. The breeze brushes your face. A goat bleats somewhere in the distance. Maybe, just maybe, you could get used to this until your host offers you a second bowl. You peer inside. It's more bread with, wait, is that mashed beans? Possibly lentils. You can't tell. Everything's been cooked until unrecognizable. You politely nibble and tell yourself it's hearty, nutritious, historically significant. Your stomach, however, whispers mutiny. You thank your host, even though your breath now contains notes of raw onion, sour grain, and existential dread. She beams, clearly pleased. Hospitality is everything here. Refusing food would have been rude, even offensive to the gods, and let's be honest, you're going to need those calories. Because soon it's time to head out, and breakfast was just the soft opening act. You step outside, full of barley beer, breath like a garlic festival, and slightly dizzy from the heat. A simple errand, a walk to the nearby granary, is next. Easy, right? A little morning stroll? That illusion lasts exactly 12 steps. The path is sun-baked and uneven, a mix of crushed stone, dried mud, and discarded palm husks. Your thin sandals, assuming you've managed to secure a pair, offer about as much support as a napkin taped to your foot. You think you're walking upright, but the angle of your spine begins to resemble a question mark by the time you hit the first corner. Egyptian cities weren't built for leisurely walks. They were functional. Narrow alleys designed to funnel wind and trap shade between walls, yes, but also ideal for the foot traffic of goats, priests, and merchants yelling at each other. The sounds come at you from all directions. A copper seller banging pans, a woman calling out for date cakes, a dog barking somewhere suspiciously close. It's not chaos exactly. It's life, boiling in the sun like lentil stew. A man passes with a bundle of papyrus stalks on his back, shoulders dark and glistening. You instinctively move to the side and step directly into a steaming pile of something that did not come from a human. Let's just say cows were sacred, but their digestive systems were not. You try to recover your dignity. Good luck. Your tunic is hitched up, your posture's collapsing, and your feet are now half fertilizer. Walking like an Egyptian? It's not a dance. It's an athletic event. Egyptians spent their entire lives walking, to the fields, to the markets, to the temples, and their bodies were built for it. You're used to sitting, in chairs with lumbar support. Here, posture isn't aesthetic, it's survival. Here's a quirky truth. Some tomb paintings show people riding donkeys, but the ultra-rich were often carried around in litters, shaded by palm leaf fans and fed dates like pampered grapes. You, meanwhile, are trying not to twist your ankle in a donkey rut. At one point, you spot a young boy hopping barefoot across the hot ground like it's nothing. He waves. You wave back with your one hand not occupied, fanning your face. A nearby priest scoffs quietly at your clumsy, stilted movements. Dignity points 3. You stop to lean against a mud brick wall, cooler than you expected. Mud brick was the material of choice for homes, granaries, and even city walls. It kept interiors cool and was easy to patch up. Still, you can't help noticing the chunks crumbling at your touch. These walls were built to be temporary in a world obsessed with eternity. Historians still argue whether Egypt's workers walked this much out of necessity or design. Was it about efficiency, urban planning, or was the sheer mobility part of their spiritual philosophy, always moving toward the afterlife symbolically and literally? Either way, your lower back is filing an official complaint. You finally arrive at the granary, sweating through your tunic, panting, possibly hallucinating an ibis. The clerk eyes you skeptically, clearly unsure if you're here to trade barley or beg for fig paste. You nod solemnly, pretending you know what comes next. The clerk hands you a clay token, the ancient version of a receipt. You nod again, as if that explains everything. You don't speak ancient Egyptian, of course. They spoke a mix of Middle Egyptian and later Demotic, depending on the era. You know a total of 0 words. You smile awkwardly. He says something that sounds like sedge and bee. You nod again. Congratulations. You have survived your first walk. You are now fully dehydrated, slightly manure-scented, and spiritually humbled. And it's still not even noon. By the time you return from the granary, your feet are raw, your breath wheezy, and your soul somewhere near your ankles. But don't get too comfortable. There's still work to do. You're summoned to the estate of a local official who's requested extra hands for canal maintenance. Why? Because Pharaoh says so. And when Pharaoh speaks, everyone listens. Or else. You quickly learn something fundamental to ancient Egyptian society. Your boss isn't just your boss. He's a little piece of God on earth. And that chain of divinity stretches from him all the way up to the living God himself, Pharaoh. There are no casual Fridays here. No passive-aggressive Slack messages, just divine command and the constant unspoken threat of spiritual ruin if you slack off. Your foreman greets you with a grim smile. He wears a clean white tunic, gold earrings, and a pendant of the Eye of Horus, half spiritual protection, half workplace warning. He barks out an order and you scramble into line with other workers, most of whom are lean, weather-worn, and definitely judging you. Today's task: dredging the irrigation canal with your hands. The Nile floods annually, spreading rich black silt across the land, but it also clogs the irrigation systems. That's where you come in. You're handed a woven basket and pointed toward the waterlogged trench. You step in, immediately regret it. The mud slurps around your ankles like it's trying to pull you into a different plane of existence. You drop to your knees and start scooping. Your back screams. Your arms burn. Sweat pours from your temples. And still you keep going. Because the alternative is having your name scratched out of the grain ledger, which is the bureaucratic equivalent of death. You glance at the foreman again. He's watching, smiling faintly. You suspect he hasn't lifted anything heavier than a papyrus scroll in months. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptian administrators loved records. They documented everything. Labor hours, grain allotments, ox ownership, even how many days a worker sneezed on duty. Entire scrolls exist cataloging temple deodorant usage. If there was a god of spreadsheets, they worshipped him. Meanwhile, your basket splits, your hands blister, and your coworkers are definitely whispering about the new guy who can't even carry 5 pounds of mud without looking like he's seen Anubis. Historians still argue whether all manual workers were slaves, or if many were skilled laborers bound by debt, loyalty, or religious duty. Evidence suggests a wide mix, some paid, some coerced, some serving temple service obligations in shifts. But from your perspective, bent over in sludge under the eye of a semi-divine taskmaster, the distinction feels academic. And let's talk about Pharaoh for a moment. His name is everywhere, on granaries, temples, even your ration tokens. He's not just a king, he's the embodiment of divine order, Ma'at. To obey him is to preserve the balance of the cosmos. To disobey him, well, that's chaos. And Egypt doesn't do chaos. You overhear a story from one of the older workers. A neighbor once cursed the vizier under his breath. 2 days later, he was invited to serve on a royal building crew in the Sinai. He hasn't been heard from since. You nod solemnly, pretending to understand. Inside, your inner HR department is filing complaints in every known language. And still, you scoop. Because whether you're cleaning canals, building temples, or hauling stone, one thing is clear. Pharaoh's will is not just political, it's cosmological. You're a single reed in a vast field, bending under divine wind. You don't matter as an individual. You finally stumble back from the trench, soaked, sun-baked, and thoroughly humbled. A young scribe marks your name on a wooden tablet and hands you half a loaf of bread and a clay cup of that familiar gritty beer. You sit in the shade, chewing slowly, and realize something profound. You're not just working for a boss. You're working for eternity. You barely finish your gritty lunch before someone nudges your shoulder with a stylus. Not a weapon. Worse. Paperwork. The young scribe from earlier beckons you over, his palm resting casually on a wax tablet. He speaks in quick, clipped tones you don't understand, but the implication is clear. There's been a grain dispute. You blink, still chewing, and he thrusts a second tablet toward you, this one with symbols carved into the soft surface. Papyrus is for the temples. Field disputes get the low-budget treatment. You nod and squint at the markings. You recognize a loaf symbol, a water ripple, and what you think might be a duck. Are you giving someone a duck or taking their duck? Hard to say. But before you can ask, the scribe scratches your name into the surface, a clumsy cluster of symbols that probably translate to foreign idiot with sweaty feet. You've just signed something with your thumbprint, and now you're in debt. Welcome to the glorious Egyptian bureaucracy. Ancient Egypt may have seemed mystical and spiritual from the outside, but its beating heart was paperwork. And scribes, they were the high priests of paper cuts. Most Egyptians were illiterate. Reading and writing were specialized skills reserved for temple officials, administrators, and smug 20-year-olds who now controlled your access to food, water, and wages. Your inability to read hieratic, a kind of shorthand hieroglyphic used for everyday transactions, has cost you something. What? That's unclear. Possibly your goat. Possibly your right to this afternoon's barley ration. You nod again, trying to play it cool. The scribe jots a note and wanders off, humming. You remain seated, now the proud owner of something, maybe a duck. Here's a quirky tidbit. Scribes were exempt from manual labor. They were so respected that many tombs show scribes proudly displaying their pens and ink palettes like badges of honor. They often got better food, less sun, and no blisters. You try not to hate them. Historians still argue whether literacy was more widespread in the late periods or confined almost exclusively to elites. What's certain is this: being able to read in ancient Egypt was like having the keys to reality. Laws, tax codes, religious doctrine, land deeds, all written, all powerful. And you? You just signed a cereal receipt you don't understand. You try to backtrack. You approach another worker, pantomiming something between "please help" and "I think I gave away my house." He shrugs and hands you a crude drawing of a cow. Great. You've moved from debt to interpretive dance. The thing is, Egypt runs on tokens and tallies. Every granary tracks rations by carved markers. Every field has a surveyor measuring plots with a knotted rope. Every debt is logged somewhere under someone's watchful eye. And if you misstep even just a little, you might end up drafted to build tomb walls or work a salt mine in the Red Land. Not for punishment, just to balance the books. And speaking of punishment, you notice a man being escorted toward a temple courtyard by two officials. He doesn't look hurt, just tired. You hear the word "misrecorded" and watch as he's handed a basket and a shovel. Canal duty. Again, at sunset. You silently promise yourself to never sign anything again. Too late. Back at your lodging, you're approached by a woman with a short, blunt wig and sharp eyes. She's carrying the duck from earlier. It's missing a leg. She scowls and gestures wildly at your papyrus slip. You point at the scribe. She huffs, mutters something about foreign fools, and walks away with the duck. You're now down one goat and up one half-eaten duck you don't get to keep. And you still can't read. You're not sure whether it's the sunstroke, the sour beer, or the slow unraveling of your will to live, but somehow you've agreed to help with the harvest. A patch of barley near the canal needs clearing before the next flood cycle, and apparently you have strong shoulders. Joke's on them. You're led into the fields, flat, endless, shimmering under the noon sun. The soil under your feet is dark and soft, still damp from the receding flood. For a moment, it smells almost sweet, earthy. And then the mosquitoes arrive. They're not so much insects as flying needles. You swat at one, miss, and feel it land triumphantly on your neck. Nature 1, you 0. Your job is simple, in theory. Grab a sickle, bend at the waist, and slice, over and over. You're assigned a crude wooden blade inlaid with tiny flints. It looks like a toy. It feels like medieval punishment. And the motion, bend, slice, gather, is deceptive. After just a few minutes, your lower back aches like you've aged a decade. Now imagine doing this for 12 hours. Barley rustles against your arms as you move, and the sun beats down on your skull like an angry tambourine. You try to maintain a rhythm, but your sickle keeps catching on tough stalks or sinking into the soft earth. You look up and see seasoned farmers moving like dancers, fluid, mechanical, endless. You're already contemplating faking a religious vision to get out of work. Here's a quirky tidbit. Harvest season was often accompanied by music. Flute players and singers followed workers, keeping the rhythm steady and the mood light. You hear one now, a boy no older than 10 humming something repetitive and strangely hypnotic. It helps, a little. Your hands develop new blisters. The linen tunic sticks to your back like damp parchment. You think about water constantly and rest. But there's no lunch break, just a communal jug passed around and a few dried figs if you're lucky. You gnaw one like a starving bird. Then a shout goes up. A nearby worker has unearthed a scarab, a small carved amulet used for good luck or ritual purposes. Everyone gathers for a moment, murmuring about the gods. You squint. It's chipped, worn smooth, probably dropped by someone centuries ago. You wonder who? A priest? A child? Someone also dreaming of a nap? Historians still argue whether these agricultural workers were full-time peasants, seasonal laborers, or temple-bound servants. Evidence suggests many were land-owning farmers, bound by tradition and necessity. But standing in this field, neck bent and mouth full of dust, the only certainty is exhaustion. You resume cutting. Slower now. The sun has shifted, casting longer shadows. Your mind drifts. You imagine floating in the Nile, drifting past palm trees, maybe even drinking something cold and fizzy. A fantasy, of course. The closest you'll get is another sip of room temperature barley sludge. Suddenly, someone claps your back. The foreman. He says something encouraging, maybe. You smile, weakly. He laughs. Probably at your technique, which now resembles a wounded crane swatting grass. It drags on like a funeral procession in slow motion. But at some point, the work stops. Tools are stacked. Sheaves are gathered into bundles. You look down at your hands, streaked with dirt and tiny cuts. You look at the pile of grain you helped harvest. It's small, laughably so, but no one mocks you. A nearby woman pats your arm. You survived. For today, you wake up to shouting. Not aggressive, just insistent, rhythmic. You rub your eyes and step outside into the glare, only to see a line of men trudging past with ropes slung across their shoulders. Behind them, a stone block the size of your mother's Honda. Oh no, you've been conscripted. Not permanently, probably. Egypt's labor system included temporary national service, especially during dry seasons when farmers weren't tending their fields. The state needed people to build things, temples, tombs, pyramids. So when your name showed up on a registry, whether from a census, a tax document, or some cursed scribal misunderstanding, you were summoned. You join the crew, heart sinking like the very stone you're about to move. The site is buzzing with activity. A half-finished tomb complex stretches into the hillside, surrounded by scaffolding made of palm trunks and rope. Overseers bark orders from shaded platforms. Stonecutters chip at limestone slabs. Transport crews sweat through their loincloths. Dust coats everything like powdered chalk.
You're handed a rope and shown how to loop it around your waist. Your job? Pull. Just pull.
And so you do. The block shudders forward a few inches, scraping along a bed of lubricated logs, possibly soaked with water or oil, depending on the terrain. It's not elegant, it's not fast, but it works. Inch by inch, ton by ton, it moves. Your arms tremble within minutes. Your feet slide on the ramp. Sweat drips into your eyes, burning like acid. Behind you, someone yells to keep going. You lurch forward again and again and again. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some crews work to the beat of drums, using coordinated rhythms to time pulls. Others sang hymns to Ptah, the god of craftsmen, hoping divine power might lighten the load. You try humming something, it doesn't help. Sun blazes from directly above. Someone hands you a scrap of date paste. You chew without tasting. Your body feels like it's leaking in every direction. And yet, around you, people laugh. They joke. They live. These men know the rhythm. Some are proud to be here, contributing to the afterlife infrastructure of Egypt's elite wasn't just duty, it was cosmic service. Pharaoh wasn't building monuments for ego, he was ensuring the universe stayed intact. Historians still argue whether pyramid workers were volunteers, slaves, or a mixture. Recent findings suggest they were well-fed labor crews, rotating in and out of service like construction soldiers. Their tombs show respect, not oppression. But as your shoulder begins to bruise under the rope, the only thing rotating in your mind is whether you'll still have knees by sunset. Suddenly a whistle blows. Break time. You collapse under a shaded awning. Beside a basin of cloudy water, you splash some on your face, but it's too late. You're already coated in a layer of dust, sweat, and self-pity. Nearby, a man unwraps his lunch, lentils, a bit of fish, and a tiny statue of Bes, the household god of protection. He presses it to his forehead, then eats. You nod respectfully. You might need one of those. You glance at the block you helped drag. It's moved maybe 6 feet. At this rate, you'll finish in 43 years, give or take. And someone taps your shoulder. Back to it. You loop the rope around your waist again. Your hands are blistered. Your breath comes in short puffs, and still you pull. You don't know if this block will become part of a wall, a column, a statue base, or just a forgotten foundation stone. You don't know if you'll be remembered or buried in a pauper's grave. But right now, none of that matters. Right now, your entire universe is made of dust, rope, sweat, and stone. And it's only your first day. You awaken the next morning, unsure whether your legs are still attached. Every joint feels like it's been personally cursed by a vengeful deity. You try to sit up, fail, and roll off your mat with a groan that sounds more jackal than human. But today, you're not going to build tombs or dig canals. No, today you get to experience another essential part of Egyptian life, grooming. You're taken to the courtyard of a local noblewoman's home, where her household is preparing for a temple visit. You're just observing, or so you think, until a maidservant presses a small, polished mirror into your palm and gestures toward your face. Oh, you're the before photo. And so begins your transformation. First, the eyeliner. You're handed a small pot of green eye paint, a mixture of ground malachite and animal fat. It smells faintly of clay and something not entirely legal. You smear it on clumsily. It stings. You blink. The woman next to you giggles and uses a fine reed brush to trace a perfect line across her eyelid. You look like someone tried to wrestle a crocodile in the dark. But it's not just for looks. That green paint, it has antibacterial properties and may even repel flies. Function meets fashion. Ancient Egyptians didn't just want to look good, they wanted to survive the microbial gauntlet of their environment. Next comes perfume, or what passes for it. You're handed a lump of wax the size of a grape. It's scented with frankincense, myrrh, and lotus. Apparently, you're supposed to place it on top of your head and let it melt slowly throughout the day. It's like wearing an air freshener on your scalp. In 110 degrees Fahrenheit heat, you try to protest. The maidservant shrugs and mashes it into your hair anyway. And then, the sunscreen.
Yes, the Egyptians had a kind of sunblock, except it's made of crushed lotus petals, various oils, and crocodile dung. Supposedly protective, definitely fragrant. You want to decline, but you also want to survive the day without bursting into flames. You close your eyes and let them smear it across your nose. You are now a walking shrine to body odor, animal products, and questionable science. Here's a quirky tidbit. The wealthier Egyptians even had scented breath mints made from frankincense and cinnamon. If only they'd invented ancient gum to go with it. Your mouth still tastes faintly of barley and regret. The grooming session continues. Men shave their heads and bodies. Women plait their wigs. And servants rub sweet-smelling oil into every exposed inch of skin. You're offered a depilatory paste that smells like burning onions. You decline. Historians still argue whether these beauty rituals were religious, hygienic, or purely social. Likely they were all three. Cleanliness was sacred. Smelling good was godly. And looking polished meant pleasing not only your neighbors, but the gods watching from every carved lintel. And speaking of gods, you're told that today is a festival day. Hathor, goddess of beauty and love, is being honored, which explains the extra coal, the noisy flutes, and the garlands of blue lotus hung across every doorframe. You're invited to join the parade. You hesitate. You smell like a waxed onion in a perfume shop. But when in Thebes, you follow the crowd, your sandal straps cutting into your heels, your eye makeup slowly melting down your cheekbones. People dance, drums pulse, women ululate joyfully. It's festive, alive, almost intoxicating. Someone hands you a date wine mixture. You sip. It's sweeter than it should be. You suddenly don't care how you look. You're sweaty, decorated, a little dizzy, covered in a thick film of oil, paint, and something that might be sacred animal residue. But somehow, despite everything, you catch your reflection in a polished bronze tray. You don't look like a tourist anymore. You look like someone who belongs here. At least, until your perfume lump slides off your head and splats into the dust. The music from the Hathor festival is still ringing in your ears when the next day dawns, again too early, too hot, and far too loud. But there's no time to recover. You've been summoned to attend one of the temple rituals, as an observer, thankfully, though that term is applied loosely in ancient Egypt. You follow the procession through the city, ducking under garlands of flowers and pushing past crowds in their finest linen. The smell of incense is everywhere, sharp and cloying, a mix of myrrh, kiffy, and something smokier that tickles your throat. A priestess brushes past you, her hair stiff with oil and her arms jingling with gold bangles. She's humming, eyes half closed, swaying slightly. It's like she's halfway to the afterlife already. The temple looms ahead, monumental and otherworldly. Massive pylons rise like cliffs, carved with scenes of gods smiting enemies and kings kneeling before animal-headed deities. The entrance is flanked by colossal statues. You feel very small. You also feel underdressed. Inside, the air shifts, cooler, darker, reverent. The ceiling is painted with stars and the walls glow faintly from flickering oil lamps. You walk on reed mats soaked with rose water. Every footstep is muffled, every breath is measured. And then, drums. The ritual begins. Priests emerge in flowing robes, their heads shaved smooth, carrying statuettes, lotus blossoms, and trays of bread, beer, and animal parts. Yes, animal parts. This is not your average Sunday service. A small bull is led in, eyes wide and anxious. It resists, briefly. You look away. This is the Feast of Opet, or maybe the Festival of Wepet Renpet. The New Year. You're not sure anymore. The calendar here follows the rhythms of the Nile, the stars, and 100 overlapping religious systems. But you do know this. Blood is involved. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptian festivals were paradoxical. They were joyous, musical, communal, and also deeply ritualistic. That meant dancing, feasting, and divine dramas acted out with masks, and then suddenly, the somber offering of a calf's heart to appease Sekhmet. Today's sacrifice is swift. The animal is anointed, praised. Then its throat is slit. The blood pours into a ceremonial basin. The priests chant. The onlookers cheer. Some weep. You stand still, unsure whether to bow, cry, or just faint. Historians still argue whether animal sacrifices were daily routines or reserved for special festivals. Some temples had full butcheries behind the sanctuaries. Others made offerings in symbolic form. Bread shaped like a liver, or clay jars of wine that was really just colored water. But here, in this massive Theban temple, the gods are clearly hungry for the real deal. As the ceremony continues, dancers swirl into the courtyard. They wear feathered collars and golden crowns shaped like cobra heads. Their movements are precise and hypnotic. The crowd claps in rhythm, and you feel yourself sway with them. Not out of joy exactly, but awe, even fear. The kind of fear that belongs to holy places. A priest passes by, carrying a small statuette of the god Amun, hidden in a gold shrine. Everyone bows as it moves past. You do too, just in case. The priest pauses and flicks a few drops of perfumed water in your direction. Blessed or sanitized. Hard to say. As the procession exits the temple, the crowd spills into the streets again. Drums pound, flutes trill, bread and beer are handed out to celebrate. You're offered a roast duck leg, possibly one of the offerings from earlier. You take it, pretend it doesn't taste like guilt. You stumble home in the golden light of late afternoon. Your ears ring from cymbals. Your clothes smell like smoke and goat. Your soul? Somewhere between impressed and mildly traumatized. Welcome to religious life in ancient Egypt. Equal parts carnival, opera, and bloodletting. You return home after the temple ritual, hoping desperately that today's adventures are over. You'd settle for a nap, maybe a face rinse, or even just a quiet corner without a drum. Instead, you're greeted by your host, clapping her hands excitedly. She's pointing at something behind the house. You follow, and there it is, your new home. A single-room mud brick oven disguised as living quarters. The house is square, squat, and already radiating heat. The walls are made from sun-dried bricks, efficient and widely used, yes, but also crumbly, porous, and excellent for attracting things that sting. You duck inside and immediately regret it. The air is still, close, and thick with the smell of sweat, burnt barley, and something vaguely reptilian. A small oil lamp flickers in the corner. It gives off more smoke than light. The roof is low, woven from palm fronds and coated in dried mud. You smack your head on a beam almost immediately. You are now home. Sort of. The single window is the size of a bread loaf and lets in just enough light to tease you with what you're missing outside. You hear chickens. You hear someone laughing. You hear the wind. None of it gets in, not without dragging half the desert with it. You sit on a reed mat that doubles as a bed. Your back thanks you for the chance to collapse, then protests as the mat pokes you in 17 different places. You turn over, and that's when you see it. A scorpion. It's not large, but it's fast. It vanishes under a cracked storage jar as quickly as it appeared. You consider chasing it. Then you consider just letting it win. You're not proud. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptian homes often had niches in the wall to place household gods or protective charms, especially ones warding off scorpions, snakes, and particularly nasty spirits. The most popular guardian? Bez, a dwarf god with a lion's face and a permanent frown, carved on everything from bedposts to spoons. You could really use a Bez right now. You light a bit of incense from a clay cone. It sputters. You cough. You crack the window. Now there's dust on your tongue. You try lying back, just for a moment, but the floor is alive. Not in a mystical sense, in an insect sense. Ants crawl along the cracks between bricks. A beetle scuttles past your foot. Something thuds against the outside wall. You tell yourself it's a goat. You don't entirely believe yourself. Historians still argue whether Egyptian homes were crowded by modern standards or actually quite cozy. Many families lived communally, with extended relatives packed into 1 or 2 rooms. Wealthier homes had second floors and open courtyards. Yours has exactly 1 clay pot, a woven mat, and an oil lamp that keeps threatening to explode. As evening settles in, the temperature inside doesn't drop. It hovers, like it's waiting to see if you'll survive. Outside, the desert cools. Inside, it radiates the memory of 1,000 scorched afternoons. A neighbor offers you a reed fan. You wave it in front of your face. It moves exactly 1 teaspoon of air. You try not to cry. You finally lie down, pull a linen wrap over your shoulders, and attempt sleep. The sounds of distant flutes and braying donkeys mix with your own shallow breaths. You dream of modern air conditioning and then wake up sweating again. By now, your body is an anthology of aches, and your spirit feels like it's been left out in the sun to dry. But today something is different. There's music again, flutes, soft drumming, laughter echoing from the courtyard. Someone places a perfumed wax cone, oh no, not again, into your hand and gestures toward a bundle of reeds soaked in scented oil. It's a date night. Well, not quite dinner and a movie, but definitely the ancient Egyptian version of courtship. You're going to a garden party. An evening gathering at a neighbor's home, complete with wine, food, conversation, and maybe a little romance. You clean yourself as best you can, splash on a bit of lotus oil and try not to smell like a burned onion. Someone hands you a flower crown, fresh blue lotus woven with papyrus stems. You adjust it awkwardly and head to the garden, trying to channel your inner divine lover. The bar is low. The host's home is larger than yours. 2 rooms, a central garden, and even a small reflecting pool glimmering with moonlight. Guests recline on mats, sipping wine from ceramic goblets. A harpist plays in the corner. Someone's pet monkey steals a fig and gets away with it. No one seems to mind. Across the garden, your eyes meet those of a young woman, wearing a layered linen dress, her hair braided with gold thread. She's applying scented balm behind her ears while casually ignoring everyone around her. You straighten your spine, adjust your tunic, try not to step on the cat. You walk over and murmur something about the weather. She smiles politely. You try again, this time comparing her eyes to lapis lazuli. That gets a laugh. You're in. Flirting in ancient Egypt wasn't just allowed, it was practically a sacred art. Love poems were etched onto pots, papyri, even the walls of workers' villages. They spoke of stolen glances, shared pomegranates, and the sweetness of honeyed breath. You attempt your own awkward version. She humors you. Here's a quirky tidbit. Egyptians often wore scented wax cones not just for smell, but for symbolism. A melting cone was a signal of passion, of readiness, of surrender to pleasure and the gods. You are therefore currently signaling a lot, probably too much. She offers you a date, both the fruit and perhaps the possibility. You accept both. The wine flows, bread is passed around, perfume hangs thick in the air. The party pulses like a living heartbeat, relaxed, rhythmic, romantic. A servant offers a love potion, a sweet concoction of honey, herbs, and something slightly fizzy. You take a sip You feel warm. She leans closer, and then a guest tells a ghost story. Everyone hushes as he describes a young man who spurned a temple girl and was haunted by her spirit until he performed rituals to appease her. You glance nervously at your companion. She's still smiling, but you're now aware that rejection in this culture sometimes had spiritual consequences. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptian dating was informal or strictly arranged. Evidence from love poems and court records shows both casual flings and complex marriage negotiations. Spells for attraction, binding, and even revenge were common, etched into amulets, whispered at altars, hidden in jars beneath doorways. You shift slightly on your mat. You're not looking for eternal entanglement, just someone to share wine and laughs with before another day of sweating through sacred mud. Eventually, the music slows. Guests begin to yawn and stretch. She rises, bids you good night, and vanishes into the shadows like a goddess returning to her temple. You sit there, dazed, sticky with perfume, and oddly content. A cat curls up beside you. You may not have found love, but you've survived your first ancient Egyptian flirtation. And you only spilled wine on your tunic twice. You're nursing a light hangover, thank you, ancient date wine, when someone bursts into your doorway holding a cat. Not just any cat. A sleek, amber-eyed creature with a painted collar and the gaze of a tiny monarch. The woman holding it places the feline in your lap and explains, through a flurry of gestures, that you'll be watching him today. You nod, cautiously. The cat blinks at you, utterly unconcerned. This is no ordinary pet. This is Bastet's representative. In ancient Egypt, cats weren't just adored, they were venerated, sacred, cosmic, the divine embodiment of protection, fertility, and grace. Killing a cat, even by accident, could land you in court. Or worse, you gently pet the animal, and he purrs in a way that suggests both approval and threat. The woman departs with a warning look. You are now on feline duty. Congratulations. The cat, of course, does not care about your responsibilities. He prowls through your small house like it belongs to him, and to be fair, it probably does. He sniffs your sleeping mat, knocks over your water jug, and jumps onto your reed shelf, knocking off a clay figure of Thoth. You panic, apologize to both God and cat. The cat yawns. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptian families often mummified their cats when they died, offering them to Bastet as sacred tributes. Entire cat cemeteries have been uncovered, filled with careful wrappings, miniature coffins, and inscriptions. You are now responsible for a creature with a better afterlife plan than you. Your neighbor stops by, sees the cat in your lap, and bows. You attempt a gracious nod, like some sort of reluctant priest. The cat flicks its tail, unimpressed. Throughout the day, you try to do normal things. Clean, sweep, chew on a bit of dried fish, but every action must now be cat-approved. He settles on your shoulder like a soft surveillance drone, occasionally biting your tunic when displeased. You offer him a scrap of goose meat. He sniffs, declines, judges. At one point, the cat climbs to the window and hisses.
You freeze. Is there a spirit nearby? A snake? A mouse? You peer outside and see nothing, just wind. The cat stares for a long moment, then stretches, curls up in a sunbeam, and falls asleep. Historians still argue whether Egyptians truly worshipped cats or simply revered them as spiritual intermediaries. Regardless, felines held a higher status than many citizens. They were allowed in temples, they guarded grain from rats, and they inspired some of the earliest depictions of pet portraits, etched into tomb walls with names and tributes. You sit beside your sleeping guest, reluctant to move. Your leg is numb, your back itches, but the cat is purring, and you'd rather not offend Bastet. The heat of the afternoon softens into golden evening. Neighbors pass by your doorway, glancing in with approval. Someone even leaves a small fish wrapped in reeds, a tribute for your sacred duty. You nod again, now fully embracing your temporary role as cat guardian. When the woman returns at dusk, she scoops up the feline with practiced ease. He doesn't protest, just flicks you one final look, a mix of disinterest and grudging respect. You exhale. Your shift is over. As the cat disappears into the alley, you feel oddly empty. You half expect to be summoned to a temple for blessings. Instead, you eat your tribute fish, now slightly warm, and stretch out on your mat. You've survived manual labor, bad beer, divine bureaucracy, and cosmetics made of crocodile dung. But today you earn the respect of a god's favorite animal. And honestly, that might be the peak of your trip. The next morning greets you, not with sunlight or a rooster's crow, but with a cough. Your own. It rasps from deep within your chest, like a desert wind scraping through stone corridors. You sit up slowly, each breath dry and scratchy, your throat lined with invisible thorns. Not great. Your host peers in and frowns. She disappears and returns with a cloth bundle and a small clay jar. She points to your chest, then taps the jar. You're getting medical treatment, ancient Egyptian style. It starts with a paste. Brownish, sticky, and alarmingly warm. She spreads it across your chest in broad, confident swipes. It smells like honey and maybe mold, a bit of garlic, possibly donkey hair. You try not to ask. Asking won't help. Egyptian medicine is a fascinating blend of empirical observation, religious ritual, and sheer improvisation. They believed the body contained a network of vessels connected to the heart, and illnesses came from blockages of blood, breath, or even spiritual energy. The cure? Keep the vessels flowing. Sometimes with wine and myrrh, sometimes with crocodile fat. You lie back and accept your fate. A neighbor arrives with a folded scrap of papyrus and begins reading aloud from what you assume is a medical scroll. You catch a few familiar words: Sekhmet, cough, ritual fumigation. A small fire is lit in the corner, and a handful of dried herbs are tossed in. Smoke curls up and fills the room. Your eyes water. Healing
has begun. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptian doctors specialized. There were eye doctors, dentists, proctologists, even veterinarians. Medical potpourri survived, detailing everything from migraine cures to pregnancy tests involving barley seeds. Some treatments were effective. Others, well, let's just say mixing lizard tail with beer doesn't guarantee results. Your healer now hands you a warm drink. Honey mixed with fenugreek and something gritty. You sip. It tastes like licorice left in a garden. Still, your throat eases a little. You don't know whether to thank the gods or the herbs. Maybe both. She next dabs your forehead with a poultice and begins chanting softly, a protective spell. Words meant to banish the Wedja spirits believed to cause illness. The gods of sickness had names, roles, and their own hierarchies. Illness wasn't random. It was personal, spiritual, often divine punishment, or the result of unbalanced forces. Historians still argue whether Egyptian medicine leaned more on magic or observation. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts, lists over 700 remedies, many involving both physical ingredients and spoken incantations. To them, a cure wasn't complete unless it addressed the seen and unseen. The chant ends, the smoke fades, the sticky paste on your chest hardens into a mildly itchy crust. Your cough quiets, maybe from the honey, maybe from the sheer force of attention. You're given a protective amulet to wear until you feel whole. It's shaped like the Eye of Horus, symbolizing healing and restoration. You hang it around your neck, even though it itches against your sunburn. Later that day, you feel not better exactly, but comforted, like you've been cared for in a way that transcends logic. The healer checks your pulse by placing her fingers gently on your wrist and gazing at you with soft, unblinking focus. She nods. Your body is rebalancing. Outside, children play with hoops made from reeds. A woman hums while grinding herbs. You lean against the doorway, amulet resting on your chest, wondering if modern medicine lost something when it traded healing spells for insurance forms. For now, you'll take the garlic honey basil treatment over a waiting room. Even if your breath could knock over a cow, your cough lingers, but not enough to stop the next errand. Someone's flatbread was stolen again, and the village wants answers. You're swept along to witness justice in action, an Egyptian court proceeding. You expect a stone courtroom, columns, maybe a gavel. Instead, you're brought to the edge of the village square where a few stools, a reed mat, and a group of scribes under a shaded canopy serve as the local tribunal. Justice here is fast, face-to-face, and refreshingly low-tech, unless you count the styluses. The accused, a wiry man in a frayed tunic holding what looks like a partially eaten loaf. The accuser, a woman brandishing a papyrus scroll and glaring with enough fury to frighten Hathor. You're not entirely sure what's happening, but there's a lot of finger-pointing and references to last week's barley. A senior scribe steps forward, clearly the judge in this scenario. He listens, occasionally nodding, then motions to a servant who produces a balance scale. They're weighing bread, evidence quite literally, and then someone is summoned to confess. A guard walks forward with a thin stick, a beating rod. You blink. This isn't symbolic. The investigation includes physical encouragement. The accused is instructed to tell the truth or else. You wince as the stick lands. He yelps something that probably translates to, okay, okay, okay. And just like that, he points at someone else. The plot thickens.
Here's a quirky tidbit. Trials in ancient Egypt often included forced confessions, and the legal system placed enormous weight on witness testimony. There were no lawyers, just statements, scribes, and the occasional truth-extracting tap on the spine. Crowd mutters. The newly accused is dragged forward. Another round of yelling. You notice the judge making notations on a scrap of linen. Hieratic shorthand, you think. It all feels less like Law and Order and more like a cross between a town hall meeting and a schoolyard squabble. And yet, justice here is a matter of cosmic importance. To ancient Egyptians, law wasn't just civil, it was divine. The concept of ma'at, order, truth, balance, governed everything. Upholding the law meant preserving the universe. Lying in court? That wasn't just shady. It offended the gods and could jeopardize your afterlife. Historians still argue whether Egyptian justice was harsh or surprisingly fair for its time. Some records suggest that even high officials were held accountable. Others show how peasants could appeal to Pharaoh himself if local courts failed them. But from your current vantage point, watching bread-related accusations escalate into slaps and shouting, it all feels dangerously informal. Eventually, the judge stands. He declares something that makes half the crowd gasp and the other half shrug. First man is fined a goat. The second must deliver 2 loaves of bread daily to the temple for a month. Both bow deeply. The woman folds her arms triumphantly. You resist the urge to clap. And then it's over. Just like that, everyone disperses. No transcripts, no gavel, just memory, reputation, and a well-fed temple staff. You linger for a moment, trying to absorb what just happened. Justice wasn't blind here. It was hyperlocal, community-driven, sacred, and occasionally backed up by a stick. As you turn to leave, a boy runs past laughing, holding a fig he probably didn't pay for. You smile. You're not getting involved. Not this time. You're told today's lesson is about the afterlife. Finally, some peace and quiet, maybe a philosophical debate, a stroll through a garden of papyrus scrolls and soft-spoken priests. Instead, you're handed a bundle of linen, pointed toward a workshop, and find yourself standing beside a corpse. Surprise! The mummification tent is tucked at the edge of town, near the river but far enough away to keep the smell contained. Though, as you now realize, contained is a generous term. The air is thick with natron, natural salt that draws moisture from the body, and the ever-present tang of something you don't want to name. A priest in a jackal-headed mask nods at you solemnly. Not the god Anubis himself, just someone doing a very committed cosplay. You swallow hard and step inside. The body lies on a slanted table. The embalmers move quickly and with practiced care. Organs are already being removed. Brain through the nose, yes, really. Liver and stomach into separate jars, each decorated with a different protective deity. One jar has the head of a falcon, another a baboon. You try not to look too closely. Hold this, someone says, pressing a linen strip into your hands. You comply. What else can you do? You're a guest in a culture that takes death very seriously, almost more seriously than life itself. And here's the twist. Mummification isn't creepy, it's respectful. Sacred. Everything done here is meant to ensure that the soul of the deceased, Ka-Ba, and all, has a smooth journey to the field of reeds, an eternal paradise where the Nile always floods at the perfect level. The beer is always cold, and no one ever steps on a dung beetle. Process is clinical, but filled with ritual. Incantations are whispered as amulets are tucked into linen folds. The priest draws protective symbols and oil around the wrappings. You catch the word Horus several times. The gods are always listening, especially when someone is preparing to meet them. Here's a quirky tidbit. One of the last rituals involves placing a small scroll or carved tablet known as the Book of the Dead near the mummy. It contains passwords, yes, literal passwords, for getting past supernatural gatekeepers in the afterlife. Like a very dusty video game walkthrough. Historians still argue whether the full mummification process was reserved strictly for elites or whether middle-class families had budget options. Evidence suggests there were different tiers: deluxe embalming with gold and cedar resin, modest treatments with linen and natron, and very humble burials wrapped in palm fiber mats. You help seal the body in its final linens, now rescented with myrrh and lotus oil. A painted coffin waits nearby, not grand, but lovingly adorned, scenes of the deceased offering to Osiris, images of protective gods, and a hopeful depiction of the soul standing triumphantly before the scales. Ah, yes. The scale, the most famous moment of the afterlife journey. The weighing of the heart. Anubis balances your heart against the feather of Maat, truth, justice, order. Too heavy with sin, you're devoured by Amit, part lion, part hippo, part crocodile, not exactly a comforting therapist. Too light. You pass into eternal peace. And the real kicker? Your heart had to be honest. Ancient Egyptians believed it remembered everything. Every lie, every theft, every snarky comment you made about a neighbor's goat. You could fool a scribe, maybe even a judge, but not your own heart. You look down at the wrapped body one final time and wonder what his heart will say. As the embalmers carry the coffin away, a group of women begin a mourning song outside the tent. High-pitched, rhythmic, oddly beautiful. They chant the name of the deceased, making sure it's spoken aloud, because to be forgotten in Egypt is the second death. You stay a while longer, incense, smoke curling around your head. The sun outside glows gold on the Nile. One day, you will leave this world too. Better start working on your passwords. You've barely shaken the scent of natron from your clothes when your host hands you a clay cup and a prayer scroll. You've caught a cold or something like it, and in ancient Egypt, even a sneeze is grounds for spiritual concern. Your nose drips, your head throbs, but more importantly, everyone's staring at you like you've invited chaos into their home. Time for purification. You're escorted to a quiet corner of the household where a low basin has been filled with Nile water, laced with petals and crushed herbs. You're told to wash your hands, mouth, ears, and feet in that order, not just for hygiene, but to cleanse the breath and hearing of offense. You snort water through your nose, sputter, and earn a mildly sympathetic nod from an elder. Next, the incense. You kneel as a priest, or maybe just a really dramatic cousin. Swirls a censer around your head, filling your sinuses with sharp frankincense and what might be roasted fig bark. Your sinuses burn. You sneeze. Everyone applauds. Illness here is never just illness. It's a potential curse, a sign of imbalance, or maybe an offended God tapping your shoulder. One's health is woven into the web of family, fate, and favor from the divine. A neighbor offers you a talisman, a small amulet in the shape of a frog. It's Hecate, the fertility goddess, also invoked for healing. You accept it gratefully and place it on your chest. The copper feels oddly comforting.
Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptian pregnancy tests involved soaking barley and emmer wheat with a woman's urine. If either grain sprouted, it indicated pregnancy. Bonus: the specific sprout predicted gender. Science? Magic? Both. No results in 5 days? Try again next month. You're handed a mixture in a ceramic mug. It smells like warm mud and licorice. You take a sip. It's sweetened with honey, thickened with acacia gum, and spiced with fenugreek and cinnamon. Not terrible. Might be better if it weren't also packed with mashed garlic and something that tastes suspiciously like crushed beetle wing. You're told this potion will loosen the chest, clear the spirit, and confuse evil. The last one seems important. After drinking, you're led to a shady part of the courtyard and instructed to lie down on a mat sprinkled with crushed lotus petals. A woman sits beside you, softly reciting what sounds like a lullaby. It's a healing hymn, she says, originally whispered by Isis as she restored Osiris. Your headache eases. The warmth of the sun on your toes feels less hostile now, more like a blanket. The breeze dances through the palms. Somewhere nearby, a scribe chants invocations to Thoth, god of knowledge and medicine, asking him to unwrite your affliction. Historians still argue whether Egyptian healing was placebo or practical. Some remedies, like honey for wounds, were genuinely antibacterial. Others, like applying fried lizard skin to sore gums, might not pass modern approval. But the holistic approach, physical, spiritual, emotional, was surprisingly advanced. Patients weren't just treated, they were soothed. By sunset, your fever has broken. A young girl hands you a handful of dried dates to sweeten your blood, she says. You smile, still congested, and pop one in your mouth. You've survived ancient illness. You've been steamed, smoked, and sung back to health. Modern cold medicine might work faster, but no one in your time ever prayed for your nose. You feel better the next morning, well, better enough, and just in time, because today is hot, not warm, not toasty, hot. The kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and your bones feel pre-cooked. Naturally, this is when someone suggests you take a refreshing bath in the Nile. You hesitate, then remember you haven't fully bathed in, well, ever since arriving. Sweat, dust, funeral incense, medicinal garlic potions. You're carrying enough sense to qualify as a walking spice rack. Fine, you agree. The group heads down to a muddy inlet where reeds sway lazily and herons eye you with suspicion. Locals strip to their loincloths or linen shifts and wade in without ceremony. You follow suit, stepping cautiously into the cool, murky water. It's heavenly for about 12 seconds. Then something brushes your leg. You shriek. Everyone laughs. Welcome to the great paradox of Egypt's lifeblood. The Nile gives, yes, but it also harbors things, slimy things, bitey things, tiny invisible invaders that slip through skin and make themselves at home. Schistosomiasis, for one, or in simpler terms, the parasite that ruins your month. You try to relax, even as you eye every ripple. The water feels good on your aching muscles, and someone hands you a lump of natron to scrub with. It smells like salted clay and sand, and it does the job. You scrub arms, legs, face, hair. You now vaguely resemble a well-seasoned cooking stone. Still, better than the alternative. Here's a quirky tidbit. Despite their deep spiritual cleanliness, Egyptians had no soap. They relied on natron, oils, and abrasion. Temples even had purification pools, sacred water, blessed by priests and regularly filtered through sand. Meanwhile, your own bath includes a suspicious floating fig you decide not to ask. You watch a boy dive in and surface with a lotus bloom clenched in his teeth. The girls laugh. You smile too. There's joy here, even with the parasites. Back on shore, someone offers you oil. A blend of myrrh, moringa, and probably goat essence. It's meant to seal the skin, trap in moisture, and keep you from drying out like a raisin. You rub it in. Your skin glistens. You smell less like death and more like a very determined perfumery. Historians still argue how aware ancient Egyptians were of the health risks of bathing in the Nile. Medical texts list illness from water spirits and offer charms for protection, but there's no hard evidence they understood bacteria. Still they knew the dangers. Sacred pools were separate from common bathing areas. Children were warned to stay near the shore, and priests, they purified constantly. As you lie on a warm rock, drying in the sun, the wind picks up slightly. The reeds rustle. Dragonflies dart past. You close your eyes and pretend you're at a very rustic spa. Until someone yells, "Crocodile!" You bolt upright. False alarm. Just a log. Your heart thumps anyway. You step gingerly back into your tunic, still damp from yesterday's ghost-scented sweat. But at least now you've bathed, exfoliated, and partially avoided being consumed by river gods. You smell faintly of salt, myrrh, and moral victory, even if something still itches behind your knee. By now, you face the sun, the mud, the priests, the parasites, and even the cat. You've done your share of labor and more than your share of regrettable beverages. But if there's one lesson ancient Egypt wants to teach you above all else, it's this. Are watching. Always. From the moment you open your eyes in the morning to the last breath you exhale at night, every action, gesture, hiccup, or mistake is wrapped in divine consequence. This isn't paranoia. This is protocol. Today, your host invites you to participate in a small household ritual, a protective charm against bad dreams and unlucky winds. That's the actual phrase, unlucky winds. You've definitely felt a few of those lately. The ceremony begins with offerings. Nothing dramatic, just a few dates, a cup of beer, a slice of bread arranged carefully on a reed mat near the family shrine. The central figure is a tiny statue of Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess of childbirth and protection.
She's stocky, snub-nosed, and somehow comforting. You bow slightly. It feels right. Then comes the incantation. The eldest daughter chants from a memory that's clearly been passed down through generations. Her voice is low, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Words blend into each other like watercolors. May the jaws of the darkness be sealed. May the sleeper's heart not wander. You shift your weight. Try not to knock anything over. Your host hands you a small scroll tucked into a clay case. Inside is a drawing of a serpent being stabbed by a falcon. It's meant to go under your bed tonight. For safety. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptians slept with amulets sewn into their pillows or carved into their headrests. Some even left messages to their own souls, polite requests like, "Please don't wander too far while I sleep." Paranoia wasn't superstition, it was survival. Ghosts, curses, malevolent spirits, vengeful ancestors, any of them could sneak in during dreams. You weren't just asleep. You were spiritually unattended. Historians still argue whether this intense spiritual vigilance was driven by religion or societal control. Was it genuine cosmic fear or a clever way to keep people obedient when no overseer was watching? Either way, it worked. You find yourself double-checking how you set your cup down, muttering apologies to a wall carving when you bump it. Later that evening, you walk past the village outskirts and see a woman scattering grain near the edge of a field. You ask why. She says it's for the spirits, those who watch from the reeds. You glance at the long grasses swaying near the canal. They look back. You return home and carefully place the scroll under your mat, along with the frog-shaped Hecate amulet. You draw a symbol of the Ankh on your palm with charcoal, just in case. The house is quiet. The oil lamp burns low. Someone coughs in a neighboring courtyard. You listen to the silence, heart slowing, eyes adjusting to the dark. And still, in the stillness, you can feel it. The weight of 1,000 gods stitched into the fabric of everyday life. Watching, judging, guarding, or waiting. You curl under your linen wrap and whisper one of the incantations you've picked up. May my name be remembered. May my shadow stay close. May my heart weigh no more than a feather. Then you close your eyes and hope the unlucky winds pass you by. You awaken before dawn, startled by voices outside your window. Low murmurs, rhythmic, rising like mist from the riverbank. When you step outside, the sky is a dark indigo, just beginning to pale at the edges. The whole village is stirring. A funeral procession is assembling. It's not a tragic scene, not loud or weepy, but measured, purposeful. The woman who passed was elderly, well-loved, and, as you overhear, ready. Today her journey to the afterlife begins. You're motioned to join, and so you fall in beside neighbors, carrying jars of beer, baskets of bread, bundles of flowers, and one carefully wrapped bundle of clothing, the deceased's favorite tunic. She'll want to look nice, someone mutters. The procession moves slowly toward the necropolis, the city of the dead. Nestled into the cliffs like a secret kept for generations. The limestone path crunches underfoot. The sun begins to rise,
casting long golden beams through the haze. You pass statues of jackal-headed Anubis, painted steely with prayers carved deep, and small offering tables decorated with dried lotus blooms. At the tomb site, a group of priests chant as the coffin is set down. Offerings are arranged, incense is lit. You recognize some of the words: Ma'at, Ka, Ba, field of reeds. The air is thick with smoke and reverence. And then, quiet. The final ritual, the opening of the mouth. A priest, adorned in leopard skin robes, touches the deceased's lips with a curved tool, symbolically granting her voice, breath, and senses in the afterlife. Without this rite, the soul could not eat, speak, or defend itself in the halls of judgment. You're handed a scrap of linen and told to tie it to the tamarisk tree nearby. So she remembers you, they say. You tie the knot. Here's a quirky tidbit. Even in death, Egyptians had bills to pay. Families made regular payments to mortuary priests to ensure the dead were fed, honored, and spiritually maintained. Forget to pay? Your loved one might be left spiritually unfed. An awkward situation in eternity. Historians still argue whether funerary payments were mostly spiritual obligation or a clever way to support temple economies. Either way, it meant dying wasn't cheap. Even after death, debts had to be settled, offerings maintained, names spoken regularly. Eternal peace came with a monthly invoice. As the burial ends, you notice a young scribe etching the woman's name onto a small shard of pottery. He slips it inside the tomb. It will outlast the flowers, the food, even the linen. A name written is a soul remembered. The group heads back slowly. There's no feast, just quiet sharing of bread and murmured stories. The woman's cat rubs against your ankle. You smile sadly. That evening, you sit on the rooftop and watch the stars emerge. You've lived, loved, worked, coughed, flirted, feared, and now mourned, all in this strange, beautiful place. You've learned the language of linen, of incense, of shadow. You have not lasted a day. You have lasted a lifetime. And it's time to rest. The night settle now. The fires have dimmed, the laughter faded. The Nile lies still beneath the starlight, like a ribbon of obsidian winding through eternity. The hot air has cooled to a whisper, and even the reed grass no longer stirs. You lie on your mat beneath an open sky, soft linen against your sun-worn skin. Every sound is hushed, the quiet chirp of a cricket, the distant hoot of an owl, the creak of drying palm branches. The world has slowed its breath. Your body is tired, but not heavy. It floats gently between now and forever, warmed by memory, cradled by ancient silence. The gods have watched you. The sand has shaped you. The people have carried you through. And still you remain. Let the echoes of drums fade from your bones. Let the scent of incense drift from your hair. Let the weight of everything you've seen melt into stillness. You are no longer a stranger. You are part of the story now. And as the stars above trace their quiet patterns across the sky, silent prayers etched in light, your soul too is remembered. So close your eyes, breathe deep, and rest well, traveler of time. Your journey ends here.